Shabbat Shalom. In a few weeks, I will have the honor to officiate at my first wedding. Under a chuppah in Raleigh, Erica and Amanda, who are two new young members of our congregation, will transform from Erica and Amanda, two people, into Erica and Amanda, a married couple, a family. Ritual has that power to transform. And yet, one might argue that a marriage is really consummated, that two people really become a family when they build IKEA furniture together. Am I right? I'm looking at my husband. Assembling furniture is a very holy task because it serves as a template for building a shared life together, for building a home. There's a special transformation that occurs when we work on a shared holy project together. And certainly this phenomenon is not limited to married partners or to furniture assembly. It can happen when we work together to, for example, cook or serve food to people who are hungry, or run an event like the Purim Carnival, or create and share music in a band. Rabbi Sachs of blessed memory said that it's not what happens to us, but what we do that gives us identity and responsibility. Collaborating on a shared project involves combining resources, communicating, being willing to step forward, and knowing when to draw back and let others take the lead. This week, the Israelites embark on a monumental project together. The story of the Mishkan, our portable container for holiness, is told twice in the Bible. First as instructions, a how-to guide, and then in this week's Parsha as implementation, or a description of how the Israelites got the job done. In both cases, the building of the Mishkan is juxtaposed with the laws about keeping Shabbat. The rabbis defined the 39 categories of melacha, or work that is not permitted on Shabbat, from the actions taken in the building of the Mishkan, underscoring this connection between Shabbat and the Mishkan. Rabbi Sachs also notes that the creation of the Mishkan mirrors the creation of the world. In the wilderness, he says, long before they crossed the Jordan and entered the promised land, God told the Israelites to build a miniature universe. Why would God instruct the Israelites in this way? Perhaps because this building project is a key element to becoming one, to becoming a community, not a disparate group of people, but a people that beats with one heart. Our Parsha begins, Vayakhel Moshe et kol edah b'nei Yisrael. Moses then convoked or convened the whole Israelite community. This is the story of becoming a kahal, assembled for a holy job, to create a space for God to dwell in our world. The people come together to work for shared purpose. It's an understatement to say that our times are ripe with division. What can we learn from the building of the Mishkan that might help us go in the direction of healing these divisions? So Moshe has created a congregation for a holy purpose. But what makes a project holy or sacred? Last week, the Israelites got together to build the golden calf, an assembly that was born out of anxiety and misplaced desire. In our study sessions last week and this week, we noted the distinction between building a golden calf and building a mishkan can be quite subtle. How do we know if we're building to fulfill our desire to worship our own creation, or the desire to serve a higher sacred purpose? The Israelites, fortunately, have precise instructions to follow, and now they're all assembled. But before we can get to the building, we have a seeming detour, instructions regarding Shabbat. Mordechai Yosef Liener of Izbika, the Izbitcher Izbitzer, I think I'm saying that right, Rebbe. He was a 19th century Polish Hasidic Rebbe. Like other rabbis preceding him, he noted the commandment to observe Shabbat occurs right before the building of the Mishkan. He says, in building the Mishkan, all of Israel were joined in their hearts, and no one felt superior to his fellow. Well, how did this sense of equality come about? At first, says the Izbitzer, each artisan worked so hard on his part of the creation that it seemed to him that his own work was extraordinary. But then, when they joined their parts of the work together, they saw how the boards, the sockets, the loops, and the curtains fit together almost in an uncanny way, as if they had been fashioned by one person. At that moment, each individual realized that he or she was part of a whole. They realized that they are dependent on each other. What they accomplished was only possible because of God, because God undergirds the entire project. God guides the hands of all. Our Parsha also says in chapter 36:13, Vayakhel hamishkan echad, and it came to pass that the tabernacle became one. Therefore, continues the Izbitzer, the one who made the holy ark itself was unable to feel superior to the one who had made only the courtyard tent pegs, because without the tent pegs, it would not have come together. Everybody's contribution is essential to the success of the whole. This requires that each person brings humility to his or her work, in essence, nullifying the ego, putting aside one's own needs for the requirements of the shared project. The distinction between an idol and a mishkan can be understood by comparing the golden calf to one of the elements of the mishkan, the golden keruvim, which we studied about in Parsha classes this week. Both are made of gold collected from the people's jewelry donations. Both are sculpted images created for a religious purpose. But whereas the calf is a singular object of worship, the keruvim form a pair who frame and draw attention to the center. These mysterious figures gaze towards each other and downwards at the same time. And what is at the center, flanked by the keruvim? Emptiness, space for God. Whereas the calf, the golden calf, is solid, and as Rabbi Shefa Gold says, full of itself, the Mishkan is empty, hollowed out to invite God's presence in. It reminds us that which is most important can never be completely seen or fully understood. Leaving space for God brings us full circle back to Shabbat. The essence of Shabbat involves creating a container for the divine. Maybe that is why part of Shabbat is leaving some space, time that is not filled up with a to-do list, time when we rest from our sacred building projects. And like the building of the Mishkan, we really cannot do Shabbat properly on our own. Shabbat is not only about having time to lounge around and rest by yourself, though that can be nice too. Actually, we create Shabbat by coming together. And this morning is a great example of how we literally could not create it on our own. This service takes Gabayim, Shlichei Tzibur, Torah readers, Haftorah readers. It takes people behind the scenes like Ed, our executive director, and Amy Brannick. It takes Jose and Daniel and Blanca and Dory in the kitchen cooking, our support staff. It takes each of us who showed up to make a minyan. Their hearts were connected, but the Shekhinah could not dwell if even a peg was missing, says the Izbitzer. Everyone's contribution was essential. Like a good building project, Shabbat is the great equalizer. Rabbi Sachs says that this last third of the book of Exodus is telling us that our primary task is to build a home for God, to build a home for the divine presence here. among us. God's ability to create a home for us, which we read about in Genesis, is one thing. But what's really a challenge, the challenge of the book of Exodus, is human beings' ability to create a home for God. We also learn that the task of becoming a people, of creating a collective identity, is actually not achieved by being freed from slavery. It is achieved by building the Mishkan together. Repeating what Rabbi Sachs said, it is not what happens to us, but what we do that gives us identity and responsibility. The Torah reminds us that building and resting from building are two essential human functions that must be in alignment. Judith Shulevitz shares a teaching from the 18th century Rabbi Elijah of Vilna, the Vilna Gaon, who said, and this is Shulevitz's words, her paraphrasing, God stopped to show us that what we create only becomes meaningful once we stop creating it and start remembering why it was worth creating in the first place. We have to stop because we have to remember to stop because we have to stop in order to remember. I return to our earlier question. What can we learn from the building of the Mishkan that can help us heal from the painful divisions and fractures that we face today? We learn that when we come together to build, we must never lose sight of the shared purpose, and we must leave space for God, the center. We remember that while each of our contributions is essential, none of us builds a Mishkan on our own. For that, it takes a kahal, a sacred community. Shabbat shalom.